guys, it's Carrie with Rockin G Farm. I am so glad that you have joined me for my first video of 2023. For those of you who are new here to my channel, my husband and myself moved to our forever home 4 years ago. Well, about 2 years after that is when everything kind of went crazy. So that's when I started my YouTube channel. And I would love for you to join us in 2023 as we continue building the infrastructure on our small family farm. I will continue to have videos on gardening, harvesting your garden, food preservation, along with all things chicken. How to care for chickens, and hopefully going through the NPIP certification process for my chicken flock. Along with those, I will be adding in some DIY videos along with some bake with me videos. So let's get started now on my first video for 2023. All right, let's get started. First thing I'm going to do, I am going to cover up my clothes because sometimes I'm a little messy when I cook. And so we're going to go ahead and put my apron on. And then the next thing that we really need to do when you start baking is to wash your hands. And I know that I'm going to be using my fingers a lot making this, so I'm going to go ahead and take my rings off and any jewelry that is on my wrist. That's going to help with infection control and keeping all the germs that would be in your rings from getting into your product that you're making. So let me turn around and wash my hands real quick. To do when I'm first washing my hands is getting a fresh towel to dry my hands. I don't want to put germs back on my hands after I just washed them. So anyway, let me tell you guys, I was so hungry this morning when I got up, and I was like, oh, I want some fresh homemade biscuits. And I was like, well, crud. I have a early morning appointment, and I was like, well, I don't think I'm gonna have time to make biscuits, so I'll just make breakfast and not have biscuits. So we had toast. But my husband and I love homemade biscuits, so that's what we're going to do today. I am going to show you how to make homemade biscuits, buttermilk biscuits, I should say at that. So let me go ahead and tell you everything that we have on our ingredients right here. I do have a little mat on my countertop so that this is my clean area, so I know that this is where all of my handling of my dough for my biscuits need to go. So what I've got in my batter bowl from Pampered Chef, as long as if you've been here before, you know I'm a Pampered Chef snob. I don't sell Pampered Chef, but I just love it. And I think it just kind of all started out when I was a young mom. It was just easier to take the kids and go to a party and just buy everything there. I didn't have to take the kids to the store. They could play in the playroom while all of us, their mom, got together and had some friend time, and then they got to play with their friends. So that's how I ended up with the majority of all my Pampered Chef stuff. So almost everything's Pampered Chef in my kitchen. So here we go, batter bowl. Okay, so this is 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And so I've got that in here, and then I have 1 tablespoon of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, and 1 teaspoon of salt. And I have that in here. And sometimes when you look at your baking soda can become clumpy. So just get a spoon or something, and it's going to be a little loud and like a scraping on the chalkboard noise, but I'm going to make sure that my clumps are all the way out of my baking soda, and I am mixing the baking soda, baking powder, and salt all together. So I've got that, and that looks pretty good right there. It looks like there's no big clumps, so I'm going to put that there. I also need 1 cup of buttermilk. And so I didn't have buttermilk with me, so what I did, I added 1 tablespoon of distilled vinegar with regular milk, and this is what we have. It's now buttermilk. So you can always make your own homemade buttermilk.
So don't get discouraged if you don't have buttermilk on hand. You can always make buttermilk by adding 1 tablespoon of distilled vinegar to 1 cup of milk. And that is what I'm doing here because no, I didn't have any buttermilk on hand. So I made my own and I put it in the refrigerator until I was ready to bring it out to make the biscuits.
So I've got that and it is chilled. It's been in the refrigerator for a while. And now I need 6 tablespoons of butter, and I am going to grate that butter into this bowl real quick. Let me get my butter. That's one thing I forgot. Now, the recipe that I was looking at said unsalted butter, but as a lot of y'all know, I like flavor with my food, so I'm going to use salted butter. That's usually all that I ever buy is salted butter. So that's what I'm using now, and I'm going to try to hurry up and get this done so my butter doesn't start melting. Just taking the paper off now. And guys, if you don't cook with real butter, you don't know what you're missing. Your food products just turn out so much better. So right now I need 6 tablespoons of butter, and I'm just going to grate that into this bowl.
I went ahead and grated the whole stick of butter because I knew I would be making another batch of biscuits and it would be so much easier if I already had some grated butter on hand. So I went ahead and put the butter that was left over in a bowl and placed it in the freezer so that it would be readily available the next time I made biscuits.
Okay, so the next thing I need to do is to put your butter in the freezer just while you're getting everything else together, and that will help your butter stay cold because as you can see, it's already melted on my hands. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to add my salt, baking soda, and baking powder to my 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Let's just use that. I'm just going to mix that in real well to make sure that it's really well incorporated. And don't be intimidated about making homemade biscuits. The key to making homemade biscuits is don't manipulate your dough too much. So there we go. So I think that all of those are incorporated really, really well. Okay, now I'm going to add 6 tablespoons of this butter. It's been in my freezer, and I'm just going to kind of eyeball it, guys. I'm not going to try to measure shredded butter. So just kind of like a little handful. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we're going to put that in there, and then I am going to use this is called a pastry cutter, and what you do, it's Pampered Chef. I liked my mother's that she had growing up because it was a lot sturdier. Of course, everything back then was always made better, but with your pastry cutter, you just go ahead and you start cutting in your butter to your flour mixture. And what you're trying to do is make the butter become the size of little bitty peas. Even though it was already shredded, we're going to do this and just try to get it more cut into smaller pieces. And like I said, we're going to make sure that we do not manipulate our dough too much. And then we're going to add our buttermilk. And I'm just going to continue to do this. And I might have had it a little soggy. So you might not need just 1 cup. You might want to go a little tablespoon by tablespoon. Actually, I might have done okay. Because I've done this before and the 1 cup was perfect, so maybe I just didn't measure out my flour too much. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to add just a tad of flour in here. There we go. So now I'm just going to pull this out and then put some flour down on your pastry mat or your countertop if you don't have a pastry mat. Then I'm just going to kind of start pulling that in and incorporating that a little bit more with my fingers, which your hands are the best utensils that you have. So just remember that. That's why we always want to keep our hands and our nails really clean while we are cooking. And if you can see, I'm just kind of kneading that together. Sometimes I like using that pastry blender, sometimes I don't. Most of the time I think I just like really using my hands because I can get in there and feel if I've manipulating it too much. And I think it's great right now, and I got a lot of that on my fingers, so I'm just going to put that in there off my fingers. Okay, let me see. Can you see that? Okay. So, as you can see, I've got just a little round ball. And I've got some flour on my pastry mat. I'm going to put just a little bit more down because we're fixing to cut it and get it ready. So this is the ball. And see how flaky that is already? All the flakes. We don't want to or squeeze the dough. So there we go. I'm going to do that. So for this, you can do it one of 2 ways. You can use your fingers and just push out your dough. Which is perfectly fine. And you might still need a little bit of flour on your hands because once you start pushing it out, it does get to that middle point where it's still kind of sticky. So I'm just going to be kind of pushing it out with my hands. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to cut it in half. And this is where you get your flakiness from. You bring one half over to the other half and you just kind of pinch the edges together. And you're not going to pinch the inside together, you're just going to pinch the edges. And then you're going to kind of bring it back into a ball a little bit after you pinch the edges together. Just a small little ball. And you can see how it's kind of not sticking to each other. That's what we want. Because that's what's going to make the flakiness of that. So now I'm just going to kind of push out my dough again. and try not to push too much. I'm just separating it out. And I can see the little bits and pieces of the butter in here. I'm going to cut it again. And then I'm going to add one layer on top of the other. And you can see all those layers in there. And that's going to make the fluffiness of your biscuits. And you know, I'm not manipulating the dough very much. Okay, so I'm gonna get a little bit more flour on my hands. I'm gonna pinch the edges together. Try not to pinch the centers together because that's where it's gonna have a lot of those air pockets where the dough doesn't stick, and that's where it's gonna rise and have a lot of fluffiness. So I did my pockets, the edges together. Now I'm just going to kind of make it back into a little ball, but not manipulating it too much or squeezing it too much. You're very, very gentle and very easy, light-handed, okay? So I'm going to cut one more time and then we're going to roll it out a little bit. So I'm just pressing it out, and you see how big that is and how high. Just going to kind of push it out. And this makes, I think, 12 biscuits, depending on how thick you want them. Okay, this is going to be the last cut. Put it on top. Going to pinch the edges together. Make it into a little ball. And now I'm going to bring in my rolling pin, and I am not pressing hard. I'm just trying to push it off. You can see, just trying to move it to side. You don't want to push down. You're just kind of pushing out. You're really letting the weight of the rolling pin do all the work. I'm not adding any extra weight. I'm just continuing to let the rolling pin push.
Use a circle. Anything with that as a circle you can use to cut it. You just want to kind of press down and up. Don't twist, or that's going to seal the sides of the biscuit and it will not rise. So I'm going to bring this over here so you can kind of see the layers. See the layers that are already in those biscuits right there? So hopefully that's going to rise really well for us. And just like I said, we're just going to push down. And I can feel it's pushing air back up on me.
I ended up getting 8 biscuits out of this recipe, and they were quite thick, so I was excited about that. And I'm only cooking 3 tonight because I'm the only one eating supper. Now we are cooking the biscuits at 450, and I put them in for 11 minutes starting, and I ended up having to leave them in for about 15 minutes since they were thicker than normal biscuits.
So it's taken 15 minutes. Go ahead and turn all that off. So look how fluffy they are. Ooh, look at that.
There is nothing better than homemade buttermilk biscuits and local honey. Of course, with the dab of butter, that is.
Well guys, that's it for my homemade buttermilk biscuits and my homemade buttermilk. So thanks for joining me today, and make what you have beautiful.